The invitation came printed on heavy cream cardstock with gold foil edges, and the venue listed at the bottom was a building I had quietly bought 3 years ago for $11 million. My mother did not know that. My father did not know that. My sister, the bride-to-be, certainly did not know that. They thought they had booked the trendiest event space in downtown Charlotte through a connection my father bragged about at his country club. They had no idea the connection was me. My name is Renly Castaigne. I am 34 years old, and for the last 6 years, I have been pretending to fail in front of the only family I have ever known. I live in a modest one-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood my mother calls sad. I drive a 10-year-old Honda that rattles when I hit 40 miles an hour. I wear the same 3 blazers in rotation when I visit my parents in their gated community in Myers Park. And every time I walk through their front door, my mother looks at me the way someone looks at a stain on an expensive rug. But I am not a stain. I am the founder and sole owner of Castaigne Holdings, a private real estate and hospitality firm that quietly controls 42 properties across the Carolinas, including the 8,000-square-foot industrial loft where my sister Brinley was about to celebrate her engagement to a finance guy named Pearson Alt. The same loft where my mother, 3 weeks earlier, had laughed in my face and told me to borrow a nice dress so I would not embarrass the family. I should explain how a person ends up secretly owning the building where her own mother is planning to humiliate her. It started when I was 22, fresh out of the University of North Carolina with a business degree my father called a waste of his money. He had paid for Brinley to go to Duke, of course. Brinley was the golden one, 2 years older than me, blonde where I was brunette, charming where I was quiet. And from the moment she was born, my parents made it clear she was the main event, and I was the opening act nobody stayed to watch. My first job out of college was at a small commercial real estate firm in Raleigh. I made $38,000 a year, and I lived on cereal and rice. My mother told everyone at her bridge club that I was struggling. My father told his golf buddies that I had no ambition. Neither of them noticed that within 2 years I had been promoted 3 times, that by 26 I was running acquisitions for the entire southeastern region, and that by 28 I had saved enough and learned enough to start buying distressed properties on my own. The first building I bought was a foreclosed duplex in Durham for $90,000. I fixed it up on weekends with my own hands, rented both units, and used the cash flow to buy another. Then another. Then a small strip mall. By the time I was 30, I had quietly built a portfolio worth nearly $4 million, and I had done it without ever telling my family a single word about it. Why did I keep it secret? Because the first time I tried to tell them, when I was 27 and bursting with pride over my first commercial deal, my mother cut me off mid-sentence to ask if Brinley had texted me back about being a bridesmaid in her first engagement, the one that fell apart 6 months later. My father did not even look up from his newspaper. I sat at their dining table, holding a folder of paperwork I had spent the entire drive rehearsing how to present, and I realized something that broke a small piece of me forever. They were not going to be impressed. They were going to find a way to make it small, or to make it about Brinley, or to ask why I was not married yet, or to remind me that real success looked like the kind my sister was about to marry into. So I closed the folder, drove home, and made a decision. I would build my life without them watching. I would let them keep their version of me, the disappointing younger daughter who could not hold a job, who never had a boyfriend they approved of, who showed up to holidays in cheap clothes and left early. And I would build something so big and so quiet that one day, when the right moment came, the truth would land like a thunderclap. I did not know that moment would arrive on a Tuesday in March, when my mother called me at 2 in the afternoon while I was in a meeting with 3 attorneys about a hotel acquisition in Asheville. I stepped out of the conference room because she had called 4 times in a row, and the first words out of her mouth were, "Renly, your sister is engaged, and we are throwing her a party at that gorgeous warehouse space everyone is talking about, the one on West Moorhead, and I expect you to be there and to look presentable for once." I stood in the hallway of my own office building, the one with my own name on the lease that nobody in my family knew about, and I felt something cold settle in my chest. Because the warehouse space on West Moorhead that everyone was talking about was a property I had personally renovated 18 months earlier. It was the crown jewel of my hospitality division. It had been featured in 3 architectural magazines. And my mother had booked it for my sister, without ever once thinking to ask me if I knew anything about it. I said, of course, mother, I would not miss it. She laughed, that little tinkling laugh she uses when she is about to say something cruel and wants to soften the blade. She said, and Renly, please, do not show up in one of those sad little outfits. Borrow something nice from a friend. We do not want Pearson and his family thinking we raised a failure. He comes from money, real money, and first impressions matter. I said I understand. She said also, do not bring a +1. We both know you do not have anyone serious, and frankly it would be awkward to explain. Just come, smile, congratulate your sister, and try not to make it about yourself for once. I did not respond to that. I let the silence stretch until she filled it with details about the caterer and the florist and the string quartet, none of which she had vetted with the venue, because she assumed the venue would simply do whatever the client wanted. The client being my father, who was paying for the whole thing as a wedding gift to Brinley, $65,000 he had bragged about to anyone who would listen. When I hung up, I walked back into the conference room and asked the attorneys for 10 minutes. Then I called my assistant, a sharp 29-year-old woman named Marisla Quintero who had been with me since the beginning, and I told her exactly what was happening. Marisla was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Ma'am, I think it is time." I said, "Time for what?" She said, "Time for them to know who you actually are." I sat at the conference table and looked out at the skyline of a city where I owned 6 buildings, and I thought about every Christmas dinner where my mother had introduced Brinley as her successful daughter and me as her other daughter. I thought about every birthday card with $20 tucked inside while my sister got cars and down payments. I thought about the way my father had looked at me last Thanksgiving and said, "Renly, when are you going to grow up and get a real career? Your sister had her first house by your age." And I thought, yes, it is time. I told Marisla to pull the venue contract for the engagement party. I told her to keep my ownership status completely confidential, just like always, but to flag every detail of the event to me personally. I wanted to know the guest list. I wanted to know the timeline. I wanted to know exactly when the speeches were planned, exactly when the toasts would happen, exactly when my mother would stand up in my building and tell 200 people that her younger daughter was a failure. Because I had spent 6 years building the most beautiful, most expensive, most undeniable receipt of my life. And on the night of April 19th, in the warehouse loft my mother thought belonged to someone else, I was finally going to hand it to her. I just did not know yet that the receipt would come with a microphone, a projection screen, and a room full of witnesses who would never look at my family the same way again. 3 weeks before the party, I drove to my parents' house for what my mother called a planning brunch. I wore black slacks from a discount store and a cream blouse I had owned since 2019. I parked my old Honda 2 streets away so the neighbors would not see it in the driveway, a habit my mother had trained into me when I was 24, and she told me my car embarrassed her in front of the Hendersons. Brinley was already there when I arrived, sitting at the marble kitchen island with a glass of mimosa in one hand and a tablet in the other. She was wearing a silk robe that probably cost more than my fake monthly rent, and her hair was pulled up in the kind of effortless bun that takes 2 hours and a stylist to achieve. She looked up when I walked in and gave me the smile she always gave me, the one that started at her mouth and never reached her eyes. "Ren," she said, "you came. I was not sure you would make it with your, schedule." I did not have a schedule that conflicted with anything. I had cleared the entire morning, but I smiled and said, "Of course I came, it is your engagement." My mother appeared in the doorway behind me, holding a folder thick with samples and printouts. Her name is Katerine Castaigne. She is 61 years old, and she has spent the last 4 decades perfecting the art of making everyone around her feel slightly smaller than they should. She kissed Brinley on the forehead and walked past me without a glance. My father, Howell, was in his study, and he did not come out to greet me. He never did. Katerine opened the folder on the island and began walking Brinley through the plans. The venue had been confirmed. The caterer was a French chef named Lucien who had cooked for 2 governors. The florist was flying in peonies from Holland. The dress code was black tie optional, which my mother explained meant mandatory black tie for anyone with sense. The guest list was at 212, including the alts, including 3 of the Charlotte business families my father wanted to impress, and including a society columnist who had agreed to write a piece if the event was photogenic enough. I sat on a stool at the end of the island and listened. Every detail my mother described was a detail I already knew, because every detail had crossed Mary's desk at my office and been quietly approved or adjusted by me. The peonies were coming from a Dutch grower I had a standing relationship with. Lucian had cooked at 3 of my hotels. The string quartet was a group I had booked twice for private events. My mother thought she had assembled this from her own taste and connections. In reality, she had assembled it from a vendor list my own venue manager had handed her, a list curated by me. After about 20 minutes, my mother finally turned to me. "Renly," she said, "I need to talk to you about your role." I said, "My role?" She said, "Yes, I have been thinking about this. I do not want you giving a speech. Brinley wants her maid of honor, that is Cressida from Duke, to give the main toast, and your father will say a few words and I will close. There is no need for you to speak." I said, "All right." She seemed surprised that I did not argue. She continued, "And Renly, I also need to talk to you about your appearance. This is going to be a very high-profile evening. There will be photographers. There will be the alts, who are very, very particular about presentation. I cannot have you showing up in one of your usual outfits." Brinley snorted into her mimosa. She tried to cover it with a cough. My mother went on. "I have spoken to Adelita next door, and she has a daughter about your size, and the daughter has a beautiful navy dress from last season that she is willing to lend you. I have already arranged for you to pick it up the week before. Please get it altered if you need to, at your own expense, of course." I sat very still. I had 3 closets at my actual apartment, the one my family had never seen, filled with custom pieces from designers in New York and Milan. I owned a Carolina Herrera gown I had worn to a charity gala the previous fall, where I had been photographed standing next to the governor. None of them knew. None of them had ever asked. I said, "Thank you, Mother. That is very thoughtful." She smiled, the kind of smile that meant she had expected gratitude and was pleased to receive it. Then she said the thing that I have replayed in my head 100 times since. She said, "And Renly, please remember, this is not your night. This is the night of Brinley. I know you sometimes have a way of making people feel sorry for you, with your job situation and your living situation, and I just need you to keep that energy at home. Smile, congratulate her, eat a little, and leave by 10. You do not need to stay for the after party." Brinley laughed out loud this time. She did not even try to hide it. She said, "Mom, do not be mean." Then she looked at me and said, "But seriously, Ren, do not make it weird. Pearson family is very traditional. They already think it is strange that you are still single at 34. Just try to blend in." I thought about how I had personally signed the lease on the apartment Pearson and Brinley were currently living in, a luxury 2-bedroom in the South End district that they rented from a property management company they did not realize was a subsidiary of mine. I thought about how Pearson worked at a regional bank that held a small loan from one of my entities. I thought about how, if I wanted to, I could pull threads on their entire lifestyle and watch it unravel in a single afternoon. I did not say any of that. I said, "I will not make it weird." My mother nodded, satisfied. Then she turned back to Brinley, and the 2 of them spent the next hour talking about the bridal shower that would follow the engagement party in May, and the bachelorette weekend in Charleston in June, and the wedding itself in October, none of which I was being asked to help plan or even attend in any meaningful role. I was, my mother explained at one point without looking at me, going to be seated at table 14, near the back, with some distant cousins and a college friend of Pearson who had recently gone through a divorce. The implication was clear. I belonged with the leftovers. When the brunch ended, I stood up to leave. My father finally emerged from his study, looked me up and down once, and said, "Renly, you look tired. Are you eating enough?" I said, "I am eating fine, Dad." He said, "Your sister is glowing. Look at her. That is what happiness looks like. You should try it sometime." Brinley laughed and waved him off, but she did not correct him. She did not say, "Dad, that is not kind." She never did. She had spent 36 years being told she was the sun, and she had grown comfortable letting everyone else live in the shade. I walked out of the house, walked 2 streets to my Honda, and sat in the driver's seat for 10 full minutes before I turned the key. I was not crying. I had stopped crying about my family when I was 29. I was just sitting, very still, letting the cold thing in my chest grow a little colder, a little harder, a little more certain. Then I drove to my office downtown, the one with the security guard who called me ma'am and the elevator that required a key card only I and Marysla possessed for the top floor. I walked into my office, closed the door, sat at the desk where I had signed deals worth more than my parents' entire net worth combined, and I opened a new document on my laptop. At the top of the document, I typed 3 words: the April plan. For the next 2 hours, I did not move. I built the entire evening minute by minute. I built the seating chart. I built the timing of the speeches. I built the moment, the exact moment, when my mother would raise her glass to toast my sister, and I built what would happen right after. I built the slide deck. I built the script. I built the security protocols. I built the backup plans in case anyone tried to escalate. By the time I closed the laptop, the sun was going down over the city. I called Marysla into my office. I handed her the printed plan. She read it slowly, twice, and then she looked up at me and said, "Ma'am, are you certain?" I said, "I have never been more certain of anything in my life." She nodded once. She said, "Then I will make it happen." And I went home to my real apartment, the one my family had never seen, and I poured myself a glass of wine, and I sat on my balcony looking out at the city skyline where 5 of my buildings stood lit up against the dark, and I waited for April 19th. The week before the party, the borrowed dress arrived at my parents' house in a garment bag. My mother called to tell me to come pick it up. I drove over on a Saturday morning, and Adelita herself answered the door, a sweet woman in her 60s who had always been kinder to me than my own mother. She handed me the bag and said, "Sweetheart, I hope it fits. My Camilla wore it once, and it really is lovely." I thanked her. I drove home with the dress in my passenger seat, and when I got to my apartment, I hung it in the closet of my second bedroom, the one I used as a guest room. I never tried it on. I never intended to wear it. What I did do, that same Saturday afternoon, was drive to a boutique on East Boulevard where I had a private appointment with a stylist named Jennifer, who had been dressing me for events for nearly 4 years. She brought out 3 options she had pulled based on a conversation we had the week before. The one I chose was a deep emerald green gown, floor length, with a structured bodice and a single shoulder strap, cut from silk so fine it moved like water. It had been custom altered to my exact measurements. The total cost, with accessories and the matching jewelry I rented, came to a little over $8,000. I did not flinch at the number. I had spent more on a single business dinner. While Jennifer packed the dress into a protective box, she asked me how I was feeling about the event. I had told her the basics, that it was a family party and I expected drama. She did not know the specifics. I said, "I am feeling clear." She smiled and said, "Clarity is the most beautiful thing a woman can wear." I drove home thinking about that. That same evening, Marysla came to my apartment to walk through the final plan. She brought a leather binder thick with printouts. We sat at my dining table and went through every page. The slide deck was complete. It had been built by my marketing team under strict confidentiality, with each designer told they were creating a presentation for a private investor meeting. The slides showed the founding of Casting Holdings, the early acquisitions, the growth from one duplex in Durham to a portfolio currently valued at just over $140 million. The slides showed every property by name, including the warehouse loft on West Moorhead, with the date of purchase and the price paid. The final slide showed my signature, scanned from the original deed. Marysla had also coordinated with the head of security at the venue, a former military man named Doyle Brankin who had worked for me for 2 years. Doyle had been briefed in private. He understood that on the night of the party, if my mother or my father attempted to make a scene after the reveal, his team was to politely and firmly escort them out of the building. Not arrested, not roughed up, just removed with dignity but without negotiation. The venue belonged to me. I had every legal right to revoke their presence at any moment. We also discussed what would happen with the guests. The 212 people on the list included the Alts, several of the most prominent business families in Charlotte, 2 city council members, and that society columnist. I did not want to humiliate anyone who did not deserve it. The reveal would be focused entirely on my parents and my sister. The rest of the room would simply be witnesses. After the reveal, the party would continue, paid for in full by the venue, which meant paid for by me. I had decided that nobody else needed to suffer because my family had treated me like garbage for 3 decades. Marisla asked one more time, "Ma'am, are you sure you want to do this in front of everyone? We could do it privately. We could send your mother a letter. We could let her find out through gossip." I said, "Marisla, for 34 years, my mother has made sure that every cruel thing she said to me was said in front of an audience. My grades, my weight, my career, my dating life, my clothes, my car, my apartment. Every humiliation was public. Every comparison to my sister was public. Tonight, the correction will also be public. I am not doing this for revenge. I am doing this because I have earned the right to be seen, and I am no longer willing to be seen only on her terms." Marisla closed the binder. She said, "I understand, ma'am. I will be ready." The morning of April 19th, I woke up at 6. I went for a run along the greenway near my apartment. I came home and made coffee. I sat on my balcony and watched the sun rise over Charlotte. I felt calm in a way I had not felt in years. The cold thing in my chest had transformed into something else, something steady and warm, like a small flame inside a glass lantern. At 8, I went to the office for a few hours to handle other business. I had a closing scheduled for the following Monday on a boutique hotel in Greenville, and there were documents to review. I spent the morning in meetings, and not one person in my office knew what was about to happen that evening. To them, it was a normal Saturday workday. Marisla kept the secret beautifully. At 2 in the afternoon, I went home, took a long bath, and started getting ready. A hairstylist named Bettina came to my apartment at 3. A makeup artist named Tava came at 4. By 5, my hair was pulled into a low, elegant chignon, my makeup was subtle but striking, and the emerald gown was hanging on the back of the door, waiting. At 5:30, my phone rang. It was my mother. I let it ring twice before I answered. "Renly," she said, "just confirming you are coming. The party starts at 7. Please be there by 6:45. And please, for the love of God, remember what we talked about." I said, "I remember, Mother. I will be there." She said, "Did the dress fit?" I said, "It fit perfectly." She said, "Good, do not be late." She hung up before I could say anything else. At 6, I put on the gown. I looked at myself in the full-length mirror in my bedroom, and I almost did not recognize the woman looking back. She was poised. She was beautiful. She was rich, and not just in money, but in the kind of internal wealth that comes from finally being about to be seen. At 6:15, a black car arrived downstairs. I had hired a driver for the night, not because I wanted to show off, but because I knew there was a real possibility I would be too emotionally drained to drive home. The driver, a polite older man named Edmund, held the door for me as I slid into the back seat. He said, "Ma'am, where are we going?" I said, "The warehouse loft on West Moorhead." He said, "The Castaigne property." I said, "Yes, the Castaigne property." He pulled away from the curb and we drove through the city. I watched the buildings slide past the window. The sun was setting, painting everything gold. I thought about my younger self, the 22-year-old who had walked out of college with $38,000 in student loans, and a family who told her she was the disappointing one. I thought about the woman she had become, sitting in the back of a private car on her way to her own building, wearing a gown that cost more than her first year of rent, about to walk into a room where her family was going to learn the truth. I did not feel sorry for them. I did not feel triumphant either. I felt clear. Just clear, the way the sky feels right before a storm breaks and the air finally cools. At 6:40, Edmund pulled up to the front of the venue. The valet line was already long. I saw my father standing near the entrance in a tuxedo, greeting guests like he owned the place. I saw my mother just inside the doors in a champagne-colored gown, her hair freshly done, smiling for photographs with the society columnist. I saw Brindley near the bar, in a white cocktail dress, because of course she was wearing white, laughing at something Pearson was saying. None of them saw me yet. Edmund opened my door. I stepped out onto the curb. The valet stared at me for a second too long. The doorman, who was actually one of mine, recognized me immediately and gave me a small, professional nod. He opened the door and said, "Welcome, ma'am." I walked into the lobby. The string quartet was playing softly. The peonies were everywhere, exactly as I had approved them. The lighting was warm and golden. The room was filling with people in tuxedos and gowns. I took a breath and I walked toward my family. My mother spotted me when I was about 15 feet away. Her smile froze. Her eyes flicked over my dress, my hair, my jewelry, and I watched the confusion ripple across her face in real time. She did not recognize the gown. She had been expecting a Delita borrowed navy dress. She was looking at something else entirely. She recovered quickly, the way she always did, and walked toward me with her hostess smile firmly back in place. She took my elbow and steered me to the side of the lobby, near a tall arrangement of white peonies. "Renly," she said in a low voice, "what are you wearing?" I said, "A dress." She said, "That is not the dress I arranged for you. Where did you get this?" I said, "A friend lent it to me." She narrowed her eyes. She did not believe me. But she did not have time to interrogate, because Brinley was waving her over from the bar, and the society columnist was approaching with her camera crew, and the alts had just arrived through the front doors. She squeezed my elbow hard enough to leave a mark and hissed, "We will talk about this later. Do not draw attention to yourself." She walked away. I stayed where I was, near the peonies, and I watched her cross the room. She greeted the alts like they were royalty. She kissed Mrs. Alt on both cheeks. She introduced Brinley with a flourish. She did not introduce me at all. I let her do it. I did not need an introduction tonight. After about 10 minutes, I walked into the main hall. The space was breathtaking, even to me, and I had seen it 100 times. The original brick walls had been preserved during the renovation. The ceilings were 24 feet high, with exposed steel beams that I had repainted in matte black 2 years ago. The chandeliers were custom, hand-blown glass from a studio in Asheville. The floor was wide plank reclaimed oak. The whole space could hold 300 people comfortably, and tonight it held just over 200, with round tables of 10 arranged around a central dance floor, a stage at the front for the speeches, and a long bar along the back wall. I found table 14. It was, as my mother had promised, near the back. My seat was between a second cousin named Wilford, whom I had not seen in 8 years, and a man named Reston, the recently divorced college friend of Pearson. Wilford was already deep into a glass of bourbon. Reston stood up when I approached and pulled out my chair. He said, "You must be Renly. They told me to expect you." I said, "Did they?" He said, "Your mother said you were quiet and might appreciate someone calm at the table." I smiled politely. I said, "My mother does not know me very well." He laughed, uncertain. He did not know what to make of that. He sat back down and tried to make small talk about his job in software sales. I let him talk. I sipped a glass of water. I watched my family work the room. My father was laughing too loudly with one of the Charlotte business families, a couple named the Tellinghastes who owned a chain of car dealerships. My mother was floating between groups, touching arms, refilling glasses, performing her version of grace. Brinley and Pearson were posing for the photographer. Pearson parents, Stanford and Riva Alt, were holding court near the bar, surrounded by people who clearly wanted something from them. Nobody came to table 14. Nobody stopped by to say hello to me. 200 people in the room, and I sat at the back like a ghost. It did not hurt. That surprised me. I had expected it to hurt, even now, even with the plan in place. But I felt nothing. I had spent so many years being invisible at family events that the experience had lost its sting. I had built up a callus over the wound, and tonight the callus was thick enough that the old knife could not cut through. Dinner was served at 7:30. Lucian menu was, as I had expected, exquisite. The wine pairings were perfect. The service was flawless. My venue team had outdone themselves, and I made a mental note to give every single one of them a bonus on Monday. During the salad course, my mother walked past my table without stopping. She did not look at me. She was on her way to the stage to check the microphone with the event coordinator, who was actually one of my employees pretending to be a freelance contractor. The event coordinator, a young woman named Phaedra, gave me a tiny, almost invisible nod as my mother dragged her toward the stage. The signal that everything was on track. During the entree course, my father came past. He stopped just long enough to clap Reston on the shoulder and say, "Take care of my girl, she does not get out much," and then he walked away laughing at his own joke. Reston looked at me, embarrassed. He said, "I am sorry, that was rude." I said, "Do not worry about it. He has been rude for 34 years. One more time will not change anything." Reston was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Can I ask you something? You do not seem like what your family described." I said, "What did they describe?" He said, "Your sister told Pearson, who told me at the bachelor weekend last month, that you were kind of a mess. That you had bounced from job to job, that you lived in a tiny apartment, that you were probably going to need help from the family for the rest of your life." I said, "That is what they believe." He said, "But it is not true." I looked at him. He was about my age, maybe a year or two older. He had kind eyes. He was not part of the show. He was just a guy who had been seated next to me because my mother thought we were both broken in compatible ways. I said, "Reston, in about an hour, you are going to learn something. When you do, I would like you to remember that you were one of the few people at this table who actually spoke to me tonight." He looked confused, but he nodded. He said, "All right." I went back to my dinner. At 8:30, the dessert course was served, a chocolate tart with raspberry coulis. The lights dimmed slightly. The string quartet finished their last piece and stepped aside. The event coordinator handed a microphone to my father, who walked to the stage to scattered applause. My father gave the kind of speech you would expect from a man who had paid $65,000 and wanted everyone to know it. He talked about Brinley as his pride and joy. He talked about Pearson as the son he had always wanted. He thanked the Alts for raising such a fine young man. He thanked the room for coming. He made one joke about how expensive weddings were, and the room laughed obligingly. He raised his glass and said, "To my daughter Brinley and the love of her life, may they have everything they deserve." The room toasted. Brinley wiped a tear. Pearson kissed her on the cheek. My father did not mention me. Not once. He had 2 daughters, and in a 5-minute speech at a family event, he had referenced only one. Then the maid of honor, Cressida from Duke, gave her toast. She talked about meeting Brinley freshman year. She talked about all their adventures. She talked about how Brinley was the best friend anyone could ask for. She raised her glass. The room toasted again. Then my mother stood up. She glided to the stage in her champagne gown. She took the microphone from Cressida with the kind of practiced grace that only comes from being the center of attention for 61 years. She looked out at the room. She smiled. This was the moment. I felt Marisla appear beside my chair, just barely. She did not sit. She stood at my shoulder, holding a small leather portfolio, waiting. My mother began to speak. She said, "Friends, family, distinguished guests, thank you all for being here on this most special night. As a mother, there is nothing more wonderful than watching your child find love. And tonight, watching my Brinley, my beautiful, accomplished, brilliant Brinley, prepare to begin her life with Pearson, I am overwhelmed with joy." The room made appreciative noises. Brinley beamed. My mother continued. "Brinley has always been the kind of daughter every mother dreams of. Top of her class at Duke. A successful career in marketing. A heart of gold. And now, a future of the kind we always hoped for her." She paused. She looked around the room. Her eyes found me at table 14. She smiled, the cold smile, the one I knew too well. And then she said the words that lit the fuse. She said, "Of course, not every child can shine the same way. Some of us are lucky enough to have a Brinley. And some of us, well, some of us also have a Renly." A small, nervous laugh moved through the room. People did not quite know what to do with that. Some looked at me, some looked away. My mother held up her glass. She said, "But tonight is about celebration, so let us not dwell. Renly, sweetheart, stand up, wave to everyone. Let them see the sister who is just so proud of her big sister tonight." I did not stand, I did not move, I just looked at her. She laughed. She said, "Oh, do not be shy. You are just the failure who could not keep a job, dear. No one expects much from you. Just smile and wave." 200 people inhaled at once. Marisla stepped forward, leaned down, and whispered in my ear, "Ma'am, security is ready." I stood up. I smoothed the emerald silk of my gown. I picked up Marisla leather portfolio, and I walked toward the stage. The room went quiet in stages. First, the people at the tables nearest mine, who saw me stand and recognized that something was shifting. Then the middle of the room, where heads turned to follow my path. Then the front tables, where the alts and the telling hastes and the society columnist looked up from their desserts. By the time I reached the stairs to the stage, every single person in the building was watching me, and the silence was absolute except for the soft click of my heels on the reclaimed oak floor. My mother was still holding the microphone. Her smile faltered as I approached. She had not expected me to stand. She had not expected me to walk forward. She had expected me to laugh awkwardly, wave to the room, and shrink down into my seat. That was the script. I was not following the script. I climbed the 3 steps to the stage. I walked to her. I stopped about 2 feet away. Up close, I could see the makeup settling into the fine lines around her eyes. I could see the diamond earrings she had inherited from her own mother. I could see the surprise underneath the practiced hostess mask. I said softly, "May I have the microphone, Mother?" She blinked. She tried to laugh. She said, "Renly, this is not the time." I said again, "May I have the microphone?" Marisla appeared at the edge of the stage. So did Phaedra, the event coordinator. So did Doyle Brankin, the head of security, standing just behind the curtain to the right of the stage. My mother saw all of them. She did not understand who they were, but she could feel the weight of their attention, and for the first time in maybe her entire life, she looked uncertain. She handed me the microphone. She probably did it because she could not figure out what else to do without making a scene, and she was terrified of making a scene in front of the alts. I turned to face the room. I said, "My name is Renly Castaigne. Most of you do not know me. Some of you have met me briefly at family events. A few of you have been told things about me by my parents or my sister, and I would like to spend the next few minutes correcting the record." A murmur moved through the room. My father, sitting at the head table near the stage, set down his glass. I said, "My mother just introduced me as the failure who cannot keep a job. She told me 3 weeks ago to borrow a dress for tonight because she did not want me to embarrass the family in front of Pearson and the alts. She seated me at table 14, near the back, with relatives I have not seen in nearly a decade. She instructed me not to bring a +1, not to give a speech, and to leave by 10 so I would not interfere with the after-party." I let those words land. The room was very still. I said, "I am going to tell you all a story. It will take about 10 minutes. After it is finished, the party will continue, and you are all welcome to stay, eat, drink, and celebrate my sister and Pearson. The bar will remain open. The desserts will keep coming. Nothing about your evening will change, except what you understand about my family." Marisla cued the screen. The large projection screen behind the stage, which had previously displayed a slideshow of engagement photos of Brindley and Pearson, went dark for a moment, then lit up with the first slide. A simple title. Castaigne Holdings, founded 2018. I said, in 2018, when I was 27 years old, I founded a private real estate and hospitality firm. I did this with money I had saved from my first job, money my parents did not know existed, because they had stopped asking me about my finances by the time I was 24. They had decided I was a failure, and they did not want updates. Slide 2, a photograph of a small foreclosed duplex in Durham. I said, "This was my first property. I bought it for $90,000 in 2018. I fixed it up on weekends with my own hands. I learned how to lay tile from videos online. I learned how to do basic electrical work from a retired electrician I paid in coffee. I rented both units within 4 months, and I used the cash flow to buy a second property." Slide 3, a simple chart showing the growth of my portfolio, from 1 property in 2018 to 42 properties in 2025. I said today, Castaigne Holdings owns 42 properties across North Carolina and South Carolina. We own apartment buildings, strip malls, 2 boutique hotels, 3 office complexes, and 7 hospitality venues. The total portfolio is currently valued at just over $140 million. The silence in the room had a new quality now. It was the silence of people doing math in their heads. Slide 4, a photograph of the warehouse loft we were currently standing in. I said, "This building, the one we are standing in tonight, was purchased by Castaigne Holdings in 2022 for $11 million. The renovation, completed in 2023, cost an additional $4.2 million. The building was featured in 3 architectural magazines that same year. It is the crown jewel of the hospitality division of my company. Slide 5, the deed to the property. My signature at the bottom, large and unmistakable. I said, my mother booked this venue for tonight without knowing she was renting from her own daughter. My father paid $65,000 for tonight, and every dollar of that payment went into an account controlled by me. The flowers in this room, the food on your plates, the wine in your glasses, the music you have been hearing, all of it was provided by vendors who work directly with my company. I personally approved every detail of this evening more than a month ago. I looked at my mother. She had gone very pale. The microphone was no longer in her hand, but her hand was still half raised, frozen in the gesture of someone trying to interrupt and finding she could not. I said, Mother, you told me to borrow a dress so I would not embarrass you. The dress I am wearing tonight was custom made for me by a stylist I have worked with for 4 years. It cost a little over $8,000. I did not borrow it. I bought it. I can afford to buy many of them. Slide 6. A photograph of the South End apartment building where Brinley and Pearson currently lived. I said, Brinley, you and Pearson moved into this building 8 months ago. You rent Unit 411 for $3,200 a month. The leasing company you signed your contract with is a subsidiary of Casting Holdings. I am, in effect, your landlord. I have been receiving your rent check since August. Brinley, who was sitting at the head table with Pearson, made a sound somewhere between a gasp and a laugh of disbelief. Pearson stared at me with his mouth slightly open. I said, I have never raised your rent. I have always returned your security deposit issues promptly when you have had them. I treated you as a tenant the way I treat all of my tenants, with fairness and respect, even though you have never treated me with either. Slide 7. A summary of my charitable giving over the past 3 years. Just under $2 million donated to various causes, including a Women in Business scholarship at my own university. I said, while my family was telling everyone I was a failure, I was funding scholarships. While my father was telling his golf buddies I had no ambition, I was sitting on the boards of 2 nonprofits. While my mother was telling her bridge club I was struggling, I was being photographed next to the governor at a charity gala last fall. None of you asked me about any of it. None of you ever asked. I turned and looked directly at my mother. The microphone was warm in my hand. I said, Mother, you have spent 34 years telling me I was less than my sister. You did it at the dinner table. You did it at school events. You did it at family weddings. You did it tonight, in front of 200 people, in a room I own, at a party I am paying for, in front of the family of the man my sister is marrying. She tried to speak. She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. I said, I am not telling you this tonight to hurt you. I am telling you because for 3 decades, I have allowed you to define me publicly while I built my real life privately. I am done with that arrangement. Tonight, the record gets corrected. My father stood up at the head table. He said, Renly, sit down, you are making a scene. I looked at him. I said, Dad, I am not making a scene. I am ending one. The scene started the day I was born and you decided you only had room for 1 daughter. It has been running for 34 years. Tonight, I am closing the curtain. Doyle Brankin stepped onto the stage from behind the curtain. He moved beside me, calm and professional, and he said quietly into a small earpiece, all clear, hold positions. I turned back to the room. I said, please, all of you enjoy the rest of your evening. The party will continue. Brinley and Pearson, congratulations on your engagement. I genuinely wish you well. To the alts, I apologize for the unconventional turn the evening has taken. I hope you understand that some corrections cannot wait. I handed the microphone to Phaedra. I walked off the stage. The room was so quiet I could hear my own heels on the wood. And then, from somewhere near the middle of the room, a single person started to clap. Slow, deliberate, steady, I looked over. It was Reston, the divorced friend of Pearson. He was standing at table 14, applauding me alone. Within 10 seconds, 20 more people had joined him. Within 30 seconds, half the room was standing. Within a minute, the applause was thunderous, and I was walking out of the main hall toward the private office I kept on the 2nd floor of my own building, where I intended to sit down for a few minutes and just breathe. My mother had not moved from the stage. My father had sat back down. Brinley was crying, but I could not tell what kind of tears they were. I did not look back. The private office on the second floor was a quiet space I used when I needed to handle business at the venue without being in the chaos downstairs. It had a leather couch, a small desk, a wet bar I had stocked but rarely touched, and a window overlooking West Moorhead Street. I closed the door behind me, kicked off my heels, and sat on the couch. For about 3 minutes I did not move, I just breathed. Marislyn knocked softly and came in. She set the leather portfolio on the desk. She said, "Ma'am, the room is still applauding. The Alts asked Phaedra to bring them a glass of champagne, and they want to speak with you when you are ready. Your father has left the building. Your mother is sitting at the head table. Your sister is in the bridal suite with Pearson and Cressida." I said my father left. She said, "Yes, he walked out about 2 minutes after you came up here. He did not say anything to anyone, he just walked." I nodded. I had expected that. My father was a man who could not handle being publicly diminished. He had built his entire identity on being the one who held court at family gatherings, and tonight he had been silent on his own stage. He would need days, maybe weeks, to even begin to process what had happened. He would not call me. He would not text me. He would simply disappear into his study and pretend it had not happened until someone forced him to deal with it. I said, "And my mother is still at the head table." Marisla said, "Yes, she is sitting alone. Several people have approached her and she has waved them off. She is just sitting there." I said, "All right, I will go down in a few minutes. Please tell the Alts I would be honored to speak with them. Tell Phaedra to keep the bar open and the dessert flowing. I do not want this turning into a wake. People should still enjoy themselves." Marisla nodded and left. I sat for another minute. I thought about my mother sitting alone at the head table. I had imagined this moment many times over the last 3 weeks, and in my imagination she had reacted with anger, or with denial, or with tears. I had not imagined her simply sitting. Just sitting, frozen, with the wreckage of her own narrative spread out around her. I felt something I had not expected. I felt a small, sharp twinge of grief, not for her exactly, for the mother I had never had. For the version of her that in some other life might have stood at a stage like that and said, "My daughters are both extraordinary in different ways, and I am proud of them both." That version had never existed, but there was still a small part of me, the part that had been 4 years old and still wanted my mother to love me, that mourned her. I let myself feel it for about 90 seconds, then I put my heels back on and went downstairs. The party was, against all odds, recovering. The string quartet had started playing again. People were back at the bar. Some couples were even dancing, tentatively, on the central floor. The room had absorbed the shock and was metabolizing it the way large crowds always do, with murmured conversations and stolen glances, and a kind of nervous energy that needed somewhere to go. I walked toward the Alt's table. Stanford Alt stood up when he saw me coming. He was a tall man in his early 60s, silver-haired, dressed in a tuxedo that fit him like he had been born in it. His wife Riva stood up with him. They were both, I realized as I approached, smiling. Not the polite hostess smiles I was used to from my mother. Real smiles. Stanford said, "Miss Castaigne." I said, "Please, call me Renly." He said, "Renly, may we have a word?" I said, "Of course." Riva took my hand. She said, "My dear, that was the most remarkable thing I have ever witnessed at a social event. I want you to know something. Stanford and I have been doing business in the Carolinas for 30 years. We have been hearing whispers about Castaigne Holdings for 2 years now, and we have been trying to figure out who was behind it. The name kept coming up at every closing, but nobody seemed to know the person." Stanford laughed. He said, "We just figured it out tonight." I smiled. I said, "I have been deliberately private." Riva said, "We understand why. Now, my dear, when you are ready, Stanford and I would love to have lunch with you. We have some projects we have been considering, and we think there may be some opportunities to collaborate." I said, "I would like that very much." Stanford said, "Also, Renly, I want to say something on behalf of my son. Pearson is a good young man, but he has been raised in a world where presentation matters more than substance, and I am afraid he absorbed some of that uncritically. He believed what your sister told him about you. He should not have. I will be talking to him about that, and I expect he will want to apologize to you in the coming days. I said, that is kind of you to say. Riva said, and as for your mother and your sister, well, that is family business and we will not insert ourselves. But for what it is worth, I have seen women like your mother before. They do not change. I am sorry you have had to live with that. I felt something tighten in my throat. I did not let it show. I said, thank you both. I appreciate your kindness more than you know. We talked for another minute, exchanging contact information through Marisla, and then they sat back down to finish their dessert. I walked away from their table and toward the head table, where my mother was still sitting. She looked up when I approached. Her eyes were red. She had not been openly crying, but she had been close. Her makeup was slightly smudged at the corners. She looked, for the first time in my memory, old. I sat down in the seat next to her, the seat my father had occupied before he left. I did not say anything. I let the silence sit. After about 30 seconds, she said, why did you do this here? Why tonight? I said, because for 34 years, every cruel thing you said to me, you said in public. Tonight is not different in kind. It is only different in who controlled the room. She said, I never thought you would do something like this. I said, no, you never thought I would do anything at all. She looked down at the table. She said, the Alts are never going to invite us anywhere again. I said, that is what you are thinking about right now, not what you said to me, not what you have said to me for 3 decades. You are thinking about the Alts. She did not respond. She did not have to. Her silence was the answer. I said, Mother, I am going to say something to you once, and then I am going to walk away, and I am not going to repeat myself. Are you listening? She nodded. I said, I love you. I do. I have spent my whole life loving you, even when you did not love me back. But I am done performing failure for your comfort. I am done being the daughter you can compare your other daughter to. I am done sitting at the back table at family events. I am done borrowing dresses. I am done pretending I am someone I am not so that you can feel like the better mother to the better daughter. She started to cry quietly, not the kind of tears designed to manipulate, just tears. I said, I am not going to cut you off. I am not going to disappear. But the next time we speak, it will be on different terms. You will not introduce me as the failure. You will not seat me at the back. You will not tell people I am struggling. If you cannot manage that, then you and I will not have a relationship, and you will live the rest of your life with 2 daughters and only one of them in your house. She nodded. She did not look up. I stood up. I said, enjoy the rest of the evening, Mother. The bar is open. The food is wonderful. The flowers, in case you were wondering, are Dutch peonies. I picked them out. I walked away from the head table. I walked across the dance floor, where 2 couples were now waltzing slowly to the string quartet. I walked past table 14, where Reston was standing alone, watching me. He gave me a small wave. I gave him one back. I would deal with him another time. Tonight was not for new beginnings. Tonight was for endings. I walked out the front doors of my own building, into the cool April night, where Edmund was waiting with the black car. He opened the door for me. He said, Ma'am, home. I said, yes, Edmund, home. The morning after the party, I woke up at 7:30, which was late for me. The sun was already pouring through my bedroom window. My phone, which I had silenced when I got home, was sitting on the nightstand, screen down. I knew without looking that it would be full. I made coffee first. I sat on my balcony with a robe over my pajamas and let myself just exist for 15 minutes before I picked up the phone. There were 47 missed calls, 83 text messages, 21 voicemails. Most of them were from extended family, family friends, business contacts, and one persistent reporter from the Charlotte Observer who had somehow gotten my private number and wanted a comment for a piece she was writing about the local commercial real estate scene. There were also 3 texts from Brindley, 1 from Pearson, none from my father, none from my mother. I read Brindley texts first. The first one, sent at 11:47 the night before, said, Renly, I do not even know what to say right now. The second one, sent at 1:15 in the morning, said, you ruined my night. You ruined the most important night of my life. You could have told us privately. You could have told Mom in a phone call. You did not have to do that in front of everyone. The third one, sent at 3:22 in the morning, said, "The alts are not even returning Pearson calls. He is freaking out. His mother sent him one text saying she would call later. That is it. Do you understand what you have done to me?" I read those 3 texts twice. I did not respond, not yet. I read the text from Pearson. It said, "Renly, this is Pearson. I owe you a real apology in person when you have time. I believed things about you that I should not have. I am sorry. Whatever happens with Brinley, I want you to know that." That one I would respond to eventually. I scrolled through the rest. There were notes from old college friends I had not heard from in years, several of whom said they had seen video of the speech and wanted to congratulate me. Apparently someone had been recording. Within 12 hours of the party ending, clips were already circulating on social media. The screen with my signature on the deed. The moment I took the microphone, the applause from Reston, the room standing. By Monday, it would be everywhere. I knew that without having to see the numbers. I put down the phone and finished my coffee. I had decisions to make. None of them needed to be made in the next hour. I gave myself permission to take the morning off, something I had not done in years. I read a book on the balcony for 2 hours. I ate eggs and toast. I took a long shower. Around noon, I finally called Marisla. She picked up on the first ring. She said, "Ma'am, good morning. Are you all right?" I said, "I am better than I have been in a long time. How are things on your end?" She said, "Well, the video is at about 800,000 views on the main platform and climbing. The Charlotte Observer is running a piece tomorrow morning, business section." They reached out for comment, and per protocol I told them no comment unless you say otherwise. The Alt's office called this morning. "Stanford wants to schedule a lunch as soon as you are available. And ma'am, I have something else to tell you." I said, "What?" She said, "The founder of the Tellinghaste car dealership chain called me at 10 this morning. He apparently knows your father. He said, and I am quoting him, 'Please tell Miss Castaigne that I have known Howell for 20 years and he has been a pompous fool the entire time, and I am thrilled someone finally put him in his place. He wants to meet too. He has a property he wants to talk to you about.'" I laughed out loud, for the first time in days. I said, "That is wonderful, Marisla. Schedule both lunches when I get into the office on Monday." She said, "And one more thing, ma'am. Your sister called me at 8 this morning." I said, "What did she say?" Marisla said, "She asked if I could put her in touch with you. She said her texts were going unanswered. I told her that I would pass along her request and that you would respond when you were ready." She was, ma'am, very upset, but she was not, I will say, demanding. She seemed shaken. I said, "All right, thank you for handling it. I will think about whether to call her back." We hung up. I sat on the couch in my living room for a long time, looking at the city through the floor-to-ceiling windows. My apartment, the real one, was on the 23rd floor of a building I had bought in 2024. It had 2 bedrooms, a study, a wraparound balcony, and a view that stretched to the South Carolina border on clear days. I had told my family I lived in a 1-bedroom in a sad neighborhood. They had never asked to see it. They had never asked for the address. That afternoon, I made one phone call. I called my father. He answered on the 4th ring. He sounded tired. He said, "Renly." I said, "Dad." He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I do not know what to say to you." I said, "That is all right. I do not need you to say anything yet. I am calling because I wanted to give you a chance to start whenever you are ready. I am not going to pretend last night did not happen. I am not going to apologize for it, but I am not cutting you off. I want you to know that." He said, "Your mother is in pieces." I said, "I imagine she is." He said, "She did not sleep last night." I said, "I imagine she did not." He was quiet again. Then he said, "I did not know about any of it. The company, the buildings, any of it." I said, "I know you did not. I made sure you did not." He said, "Why?" I said, "Because the first time I tried to tell you, when I was 27, you did not look up from your newspaper. And Mom was busy with Brinley wedding number 1. And I decided that night that if you did not have the time to hear about my first commercial deal, you did not have the right to hear about any of them." He said, "That was a long time ago." I said, "Yes, 7 years. 7 years of growth, Dad. 7 years of building. 7 years of you and Mom telling people I was a failure. You had every chance to ask me what I was actually doing with my life. You never asked. Not once. He did not respond. I said, Dad, I am not asking for an apology right now. I am not even sure I want one. I am asking you to think about the last 34 years and decide what kind of father you want to be for the next part of my life. Take your time. When you have an answer, call me. He said, all right. I said, one more thing, Dad. He said, what? I said, tell Mom that I meant what I said last night. The terms have changed. If she can manage it, we have a future. If she cannot, we do not. He said, I will tell her. I hung up. That night, I did not call Brindley. I did not feel ready. I knew I would, eventually. But Brindley had spent her whole life being told she was the best thing that had ever happened to our parents, and that kind of message does not get rewired in a 48-hour period. She would need time to understand what she had been. She would need to come to me, not the other way around. I went to bed early. I slept the deepest sleep I had slept in years. Monday morning, I walked into my office at 7:30, the same time I always did, and I found a small crowd of my employees waiting in the lobby. They applauded when I stepped off the elevator. Someone had brought a coffee cart. There were flowers on Mary's desk from the entire marketing team. I made a short speech to my staff. I thanked them. I told them that nothing about our day-to-day work would change, but that I appreciated, more than I could express, the discretion they had shown over the years and especially in the last month. I gave every employee a personal bonus that afternoon. 6 months of salary, paid out by Friday. It was the right thing to do. The Charlotte Observer piece ran on Tuesday. It was on the front page of the business section, with a photograph of me from a charity event the previous year that they had pulled from their archives. The headline read, Quiet Empire Revealed, Casting Holdings Heiress Steps Out of the Shadows. The article was long, thorough, and respectful. The reporter, a woman named Yulissa Bayer, had done her homework. She had pulled property records, interviewed 3 of my business partners, and somehow gotten Stanford Alt on the record. Stanford had said, Renly Castain is the most impressive entrepreneur I have met in 2 decades, and we are honored to be exploring a partnership with her firm. The article did not mention my family by name. Yulissa had decided, in her professional judgment, that the speech itself was the news, not the cruelty that prompted it. I respected her for that. I would work with her again. By Wednesday, my company had received 43 new inquiries. Investors, partners, people who wanted to sell us properties, people who wanted to buy from us. A boutique hotel group in Savannah wanted to discuss an acquisition. 2 private equity firms in Atlanta wanted meetings. A retired senator emailed me personally to introduce himself. I handled each one through Marisla, scheduling lunches and dinners and conference calls over the following weeks. The business was about to grow faster than I had ever planned, and I needed to be strategic, not reactive. I hired a chief operating officer 2 weeks later, a woman named Thedora Vance who had run operations for a regional hotel chain and was tired of corporate life. She started in early May. On Thursday of that first week, I finally called Brindley. She answered immediately. She said, Renly. I said, I am ready to talk if you are. She said, please, can we meet? In person, I do not want to do this on the phone. I said, all right. There is a coffee shop near my office on Tryon Street. Can you be there in an hour? She said yes. I walked over to the coffee shop at the appointed time. I was wearing a navy suit, the kind I wore for client meetings, and I had pulled my hair back. I wanted Brindley to see me the way the rest of my professional life saw me, not the way she had always seen me. She was already there when I arrived. She was sitting at a table by the window, in jeans and a sweater, no makeup, her hair in a ponytail. She looked smaller than I remembered. She had been crying recently, I could tell from her eyes. I sat down across from her. I did not say hello, I waited. She said, Renly, I do not know where to begin. I said, begin wherever you need to begin. She said, I have been thinking about everything for 4 days. I have not slept very much. I keep going over things in my head. Things I said to you. Things I let Mom and Dad say to you. Things I said about you to other people, including Pearson. I said, all right. She said, the truth is I never thought about you. That is the thing I keep landing on. I never actually thought about you as a person. You were just my sister, and you were the one who did not get the things, and I never asked why. I never asked if you were okay. I never asked what you were doing. I just assumed Mom and Dad knew what they were talking about, because they were the ones doing the talking. I said, that is honest. I appreciate that. She said, when you were on the stage, and the screen showed your signature, and you started listing the buildings and the money, I realized something. I realized I have never had a real conversation with you. Not one. Not in 36 years of being sisters. I do not know what kind of music you like. I do not know what your favorite food is. I do not know what you do on a Saturday morning. I do not know if you have ever been in love. She started to cry. I did not reach across the table. She said, I am not saying any of this to make you feel sorry for me. I am saying it because I owe it to you to say it out loud. I have been the worst kind of sister. The kind who took up all the air in the room and never noticed there was someone else in it. I said, Brindley, why are you telling me this now? She said, because the video has been everywhere this week. And in the video, I can see myself, sitting at the head table, laughing when Mom called you a failure. I laughed, Renly. I laughed at my own sister being humiliated, and I did not even understand that I was laughing. I have watched that clip about 30 times. I cannot stop watching it. I look like a stranger to myself. I said, what do you want, Brindley? She said, I do not know. I do not know if I have the right to want anything. But I want to try, if you will let me. I want to try to be your sister. Not the older sister who gets things, just a sister. I want to know who you are. I sat for a long moment. I sipped my coffee. I thought about the 36 years she was describing. I thought about the wedding she was about to plan, and the marriage she was about to enter, and the life she was about to build with Pearson, and how all of that would proceed whether or not she and I figured this out. I said, Brindley, I am not in a place where I can promise you anything. I have spent my whole life learning not to need anything from this family. That is not going to unwind in a coffee shop. She nodded. She said, I understand. I said, but I am willing to try. Slowly. We can start with a phone call once a week, not at Mom's house, not with Mom around, just you and me. And if that goes well in a few months, maybe we can do dinner. And if that goes well in a year, maybe we can be something like sisters. She nodded. She was still crying, but quietly. She said, that is more than I deserve. I said, it might be. We will find out. She said, I want to tell you one more thing, and then I will let you go. I said, all right. She said, Pearson and I had a long talk on Sunday. He told me that if I do not work on this, the wedding is off. He said he will not marry someone who treats her sister the way I have treated you. He said his parents raised him to value family, and what he saw last weekend was the opposite of family. I said, that is interesting. She said, I am not telling you that so you will feel guilty about ruining the wedding. I am telling you because I want you to know that the wedding is now on me. Not on Mom, not on Dad, not on Pearson family. On me. I have to become someone worth marrying, and that starts with becoming someone worth being a sister to. So this is not me trying to fix things to save the wedding. This is me trying to fix things because I should have started 30 years ago, and I am ashamed I did not. I looked at her for a long time. I saw, maybe for the first time in our lives, a person sitting across from me, not just my mother's favorite daughter. I said, all right, Brindley, we will see what we can build. She said, thank you. After a silent coffee meeting, the mother of Renly did not contact Renly for 6 weeks. During this time, the company of Renly expanded to a portfolio of $160 million, and Renly began dating a kind man named Reston. The sister of Renly, Brindley, and the fiancé of Brindley, Pearson, reached out to apologize and build a genuine relationship. Eventually, the mother of Renly visited the office of Renly to apologize, admitting her past emotional flaws and agreeing to therapy. They began a slow, honest process of rebuilding their bond. At the wedding of Brindley and Pearson, Renly served as the maid of honor and gave a heartfelt toast celebrating their new honesty. Reflecting on the past year, Renly realized that while revealing her true success ended the denial of her family, true healing and rebuilding trust would remain an ongoing journey. If you are watching this, and you have a family that has decided who you are without ever asking, I want you to know something. You are not required to accept their version of you. You are not required to perform the role they assigned you when you were too small to refuse it. You are allowed to build, quietly, the life that matches who you actually are. You do not have to do it loudly. You do not have to do it for an audience. You just have to do it for yourself. And when the day comes, if it comes, when the truth has to be spoken in front of everyone, you will know. You will feel it in your chest, like a small, steady flame inside a glass lantern. You will not be afraid. You will be clear. Clarity is the most beautiful thing a woman can wear. My name is Renly Castaigne. I am 34 years old. I own 42 buildings in 2 states, including the one where my mother once told me to borrow a dress so I would not embarrass the family. I am dating a kind man who asks me good questions. I have a sister who calls me every Wednesday. I have a mother who is in therapy and trying. I have a father who is, slowly, learning to look up from his newspaper. I have a life that belongs to me. If this story moved you, if you have ever been the child who was told you were less, if you have ever built something quietly while the people around you assumed you were nothing, please like this video, subscribe to the channel for more stories like this one, and share your own experience in the comments below. I read them. I learned from them. And somewhere out there, someone is reading yours and feeling, maybe for the first time, that they are not alone. Take care of yourselves. Build your real life. The right people will find you when you are ready to be found.